Today we're talking about interesting question. Bodybuilding, man, is it a sport? What do you think?
Is bodybuilding a real sport?
Will bodybuilding ever be an Olympic sport?
My opinion is bodybuilding is not a real sport.
Bodybuilders are athletes. However, are bodybuilders competing in a sport?
Well, I kind of wanted to talk a little bit about definitions and whatnot, right? Before I say yes or no, because really I'm kind of on the fence about it right now. Because to be a sport, I feel like you have to have competition, right? Obviously there are competitions. So on that end, I think yes, for sure it's a sport. And then I kind of thought to myself, well, there are competitions, but it's subjective in nature, right? It's not like a basketball game where we know, one team scored this, the other team scored that, and there's a clear winner. It's just who on that day the judges thought was the best built bodybuilder. Right. So for that reason, I kind of thought, maybe it's not a sport. But then I remembered that you do have sports that are subjective in scoring like that, like gymnastics, right? Yeah. So then I was like, okay, it's a sport. I just looked up before we started filming the definition of a sport, which it just said was any physical activity. So it obviously meets that threshold. Are bodybuilders athletes? I think for sure they're athletes.
I think there's no question about that. Yeah.
And I think the way things are now, in any other sport, you're training with weights. So, yeah, I mean, given all that, I would lean towards a sport for sure.
Well, let's play devil's advocate real quick and
all right.
Tell me what you've heard arguing against bodybuilding being a sport, or what do you think people would argue against bodybuilding being a sport? Like, is it just the fact that they're not displaying their strength on stage, rather just the physique, or is it
right? The argument I always hear is that it's not sport, it's pageant. That
right.
Essentially it's no different than like the Miss Universe contest, right? Like who's the most beautiful woman in the world, kind of thing.
Yeah.
And I can see that argument too. Like, to me, that makes sense because essentially you're trying to find out who is the best built man in the world. Yeah. That's basically what the Mr. Olympia contest is.
Do the Miss Universe pageant girls? Do you think they train their bodies for those?
These days, I would say yeah. I would say they have to.
I would say these days they do too. But do you think since inception they've been doing that?
No, definitely not.
So I think there's a key kind of difference. Well, I mean, obviously it gets murky if you go to modern times because, like you said, I think they probably are training nowadays. But if at the beginning the Miss Universe pageant was created to be like a competition of beauty where they're not training for it, then it's kind of like this is a God-given kind of thing, right? You can't control how beautiful you are in that sense. Mm-hmm. But taking it to the bodybuilding stage, the result of what you look like, it's a result because you actually had to do something to look like that. It wasn't necessarily God-given, right?
Yeah, so you had to train.
That would be a key difference to differentiate between pageant and...
pageant or sport.
Yeah.
Well, and one thing I just remembered, talking about it from the pageant angle, your God-given looks, right? So early on, the Mr. America contest, which was the most prestigious bodybuilding contest until the Mr. Universe came around, their scoring system, they did award points for physical beauty, basically. Like it wasn't just about having muscles and being the most muscular. It was how you carried yourself, if you would truly be a good representation of America, because you were being named Mr. America. And then you had to look good too. That's kind of one of the, there's a lot of people that say Harold Poole and Sergio Oliva didn't win the Mr. Americas when they competed because of racism, right? Because they were black. Yeah. But in truth, from what I've read, a lot of it did have to go with the fact that, they didn't think they would be good representations of America because Harold Poole had a really bad speech impediment. And of course, Sergio being from Cuba, had a pretty thick Cuban accent.
Yeah.
So those are typically what was given as the reason that those guys couldn't win that contest. So, I mean, early bodybuilding contests did have that pageantry to them, where you had to look good. I've read this. Supposedly, Steve Reeves just barely edged out Eric Peterson at the 1947 Mr. America because supposedly, I mean, they were both good-looking guys, but supposedly, like, Eric Peterson had some acne or something like that, which gave Reeves just a little bit of an edge to the judges. And I was thinking about it. If you're getting into that, does physical beauty have something to do with it? Even though it's not supposed to, I think it does play a part. Arnold's obviously a pretty good-looking guy. That definitely didn't hurt his chances, right?
Yeah.
When he was winning Mr. Olympia.
Yeah.
This may sound bad, but I feel like Albert Beckles probably didn't win the Olympia because he was kind of a fugly-looking dude.
Because he was so old.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. No, I think you got a good point, and I think Arnold even took it a step further. It wasn't even just looks that they were weighing in that sense. It kind of seemed like they were giving him credit for his charisma, for his, you know what I mean, which would seem like something you would judge in a pageant.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, for sure. And
but by the 70s and like that time where he's reigning as Mr. Olympia, they weren't putting down points for charisma on stage, were they?
Right. No, there were supposed to be no points given out for that.
It was purely muscular development.
Right.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
who is the best built man? And like I said, it's not supposed to make a difference, but I think it would be foolish to think that it doesn't. I think if you had, I think if you had like somebody that was out of this world in development, but looked like they were born under a rock, would they win Mr. Olympia? I would say probably not.
nowadays, I really don't know. Nowadays, I have no idea.
That's a good point.
Yeah.
That's a good point.
If you're freaky enough, you're bubbly
Right.
and round enough, and
Right.
they'll give it to you.
Yeah, but I think that Phil Heath, he's a pretty good looking dude. You know what I mean? Like it's not supposed to make a difference, but in reality, it probably does.
I think that's probably why there's so much confusion or so many people that question it. Because it seems like they're judging looks or charisma or whatever that might be that's outside of like the muscular development purely.
Right.
So I could see why someone would see that it's more of a pageant. But I like that you brought up Phil Heath actually, because I'm thinking now Big Ramy has never won it. He keeps trying to win it and get second place. He's got a real thick accent.
Right.
I've heard the
Right.
argument that people say he's not a good representation for Mr. Olympia.
Right. Yeah.
And if that's something that we're considering when we're going to crown the next Mr. Olympia, then it is almost more of a pageant,
Right. Right. And one thing I was thinking about though is when Ronnie Coleman was winning all his Olympias, doesn't Ronnie Coleman have a pretty bad speech impediment? Like he stutters
Yes.
or something like that?
Yes, he does.
So I guess you can overcome that.
Yep.
Of course, he's, like I said, he doesn't look like he was born under a rock though.
Yeah. And Dorian
but-
Yates had absolutely no charisma,
Right. Right.
So
Yeah.
he
None
got
at all.
past
I mean,
that.
Yeah, he literally just wanted to lift and compete, and that was it.
Yep.
So
So that's interesting. So then you can kind of point to examples where it's proving that the looks or charisma are not playing a part, and it is strictly muscular development and who's the best
Right.
built man.
right, sure,
Yeah, that's interesting.
yeah, absolutely.
Now, I was kind of coming into this podcast about to just like hands down, obviously bodybuilding's a sport, but that kind of makes me question it a little bit.
Yeah, and like I said, I definitely lean towards sport for sure. Definitely, it's a hard lean to it is a sport. But if like in the categorization of sports, it's definitely not like football or basketball. It's it's tough. It's tough to explain.
Yeah. It's hard to pick a clear winner. There's always a lot of upset. There's always a lot of this guy should have won, this guy was more conditioned, this guy was bigger, you know?
Yeah, it's so subjective.
Yeah.
But I love that about bodybuilding. I love the fact that, you know, you and me can both go to the same contest and see things completely different.
Yeah.
And you know, when I write stuff and when we do podcasts, I think it's neat that we can talk about, like, you know, well, should so and so have won this Olympia, you know, and you're going to get people on both sides of the fence on that.
Always, yeah.
And especially Arnold. Arnold probably has more defenders than anyone. You know, I showed you that you saw in my last article that quote where he even admitted, you know, hey, if Sergio would have won in 72, I wouldn't have been mad about it. I would have been the first one to congratulate him.
Yep.
And in fact, if I had been a judge, I would have voted for Sergio over myself. But, you know, you've got what, close to 40,000 followers on Instagram right now. If you were to post that, like, without the quote, if you would have posted, like, you know, Sergio should have beaten Arnold at the Olympia in 72, you know how much crap that you would get for doing that?
Forget about it. They would crucify me.
You probably have 5,000 people unfollow you.
Yeah, probably.
You know, but it's funny. But like I said, that's why I love bodybuilding is, you know, you can make an argument both ways and not be wrong.
Yeah.
Whereas in basketball, I can't tell you, like, hey, my team should have beat your team. No, your team got more points.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
I guess, you know, occasionally people say, oh, the refs screwed him over or something like that.
You know, I wonder if people were more educated on the point system in bodybuilding competition, if that would make it more clear cut. I love that you just brought up the points because, I mean, that's how they're doing it, right? They're scoring it. You got individual judges giving out points, and at the end of the day, they tally them up, and that's what decides the winner, right?
Sure.
So, I mean, you could kind of argue, you know, no, this is objective because we're looking at each individual pose, and if you win enough of those poses, doesn't matter. That's the winner right there, right?
Right. Yeah, sure.
But tons of people do not understand how that works. I don't fully understand how that shit works. Like,
yeah, I don't either.
It's so confusing, you know?
Right. Yeah, and obviously, I mean, the guys that the people that IFBB gets to judge those, they've got great credentials, right?
Right.
But still, it's like, you know, one of the comparisons I was drawing to bodybuilding competitions were gymnastics, right? Because a gymnast does a backflip and lands it. What's the difference in a 9.5 and a 10? You know, like the difference between that is so small. And I would say the same with bodybuilding, you know?
Yeah. And easily, if you ask somebody if gymnastics is a sport, they're like, yeah, of course, it's in the Olympics.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Automatically. Which, of course, I'm glad you brought that up because Ben Weider, for essentially his whole life, was trying to get bodybuilding in the Olympics.
Mm-hmm.
And
why didn't that pan out?
I've got to think because of the steroids.
Yeah. You're right.
Because even though we know now that tons of Olympians have used them in the past, and gotten caught or either admitted to it later on, the whole sport of bodybuilding is basically, you know, steroid related.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I mean, maybe if they had tried earlier, like maybe started trying in the 40s or in the 50s, that would have happened. I mean, like, for instance, if I remember correctly, I may be wrong on this, the first big Mr. Universe in 1948 when John Grimmick beat Steve Reeves, I believe it was held in London because in 1948, around the same time, they were also having the Olympic Games there in London. So it was almost meant as like, you know, we've got the best of the best, and it's like on the same level as the Olympics. Like these guys, you know, they're not in the Olympics, but they kind of should be.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's the only thing I can think of is, you know, by the time that he was really pushing for it, which, you know, all my old Muscle Builder magazines from the 70s, like just about every issue they talk about that, how Ben is like visiting this country, that country, you know, getting these countries signed up with the IFBB, and he's gonna get the Olympics to recognize bodybuilding, and bodybuilders are eventually going to be able to compete in the Olympics. But I mean, really, we know now that the Mr. Olympia is the Olympics of bodybuilding. I think it'd be one of those things where even if it were recognized and put in the Olympics, it'd be like soccer, right? Even though soccer's in the Olympics, it really matters more if you won the World Cup. The World Cup is bigger in soccer than the Olympics are. It's like, great, you in soccer you won a gold medal. That's cool, but a couple of years before you didn't do anything in the World Cup. So But no, that's interesting that bodybuilding in the Olympics.
Sorry, that bodybuilding is what?
Oh, I didn't say anything. I just said it was interesting to think about bodybuilding being in the Olympics.
Yeah, I got to think that it being in the Olympics would probably kind of change the minds of some of the people that are doubting whether or not it's a legitimate sport, but I don't know that it would really bring more people into the sport. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like, I wonder what it's going to take for the sport to really be mainstream in the same way as some of the main sports here in America,
Yeah. I think it would take, this is a different subject, right? But it would, I would think it would have to take bigger prizes, more rewards, more sponsorships, things like that. I mean, a lot of these players in baseball and basketball now are making hundreds of millions of dollars. That's not possible in bodybuilding.
Yeah, but I feel like that's a catch-22 because where's the sponsorship money going to come from if the sponsors don't think it's a real sport,
Yeah, that's a good point.
That nobody's watching it, So it's like, you kind of almost got to fix that first.
Yeah. And I mean, at the end of the day, it's not even if it's on that end, it's not even about if it's a sport or not. It's about if the money's there. Because you're not going to get the sponsors even if it is a sport. I mean, is chess a sport?
I don't know. I don't think. Is thinking physical ability?
Yeah, I mean, there's nothing physical. Well,
it's thinking a physical ability. You could
definitely.
You can get exhausted from thinking too much,
Right. And you've got to have a great mind, obviously, to be a great chess player.
Yeah.
And be able to, think several steps ahead. But yeah, even if chess were declared a sport, which it may or may not, I have no idea. Nobody's gonna sponsor.
Yeah, no.
chess tournaments.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I was just gonna say I hope that is not the fate of bodybuilding.
No, I don't think that'll ever happen. But just brought up for argument's sake.
Yeah. Well, so who knows? We're undecided.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, for me, it's a hard lean towards it being a sport, but there's also a few things in it that make me think it's not a sport. Because, like I said, I don't think someone whose face has been destroyed could ever win Mr. Olympia, regardless of how great their body is.
Yeah, I mean it could be the case. I think I want to say it's a sport. I want to believe it's a sport. I love bodybuilding. I really want it to be a sport. I'm just gonna go with that because it certainly takes physical ability, and the real hardcore fans could totally argue, it's a point system and you win it based off that. But I absolutely see what you're saying. Like, there's a lot of other kind of like intangible stuff that's playing a part that certainly makes it look to outsiders like it's more of a pageant.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
We hope you guys enjoyed that podcast. Let us know in the comments below your thoughts on whether or not bodybuilding is a sport. We'd love to hear what you think. Make sure to subscribe for future episodes, and we'll see you in the next one.
Everybody